Okay, Carol, I appreciate that you're sitting there drinking your product. I have it in my hand as well. So
Yay!
here, I'll get started with that.
Yay!
Okay, here's actually, I'm going to go, this is not on target with the show, but as I'm reading all your stuff, my first thought was feeling a little convicted. I drink a lot. I have built up a pretty good, you talked about your Diet Coke addiction. Mine is, I hope it's better than that, but it's been the flavored seltzer waters. And then I
Mhm.
went online and looked at, LaCroix and whatnot and saw all this stuff. And now I wonder, what on earth am I drinking?
Mhm.
What am I drinking in these flavored seltzer waters? Because we just pick them up here and there, whatever's in front of us. I'm not loyal to one, but now I'm wondering, I don't know what's going in me.
Yeah. Yeah. It's pretty crazy. And I don't know the answer. With all these brands. I know that when I was, initially kind of looking at this industry 15 years ago, vitamin water, back then, and this was
Yeah.
before they got acquired by Coke, they had like, cockroach wings for coloring in their product and bone marrow and some other things. And again, those things, this is the conversation that a lot of people have had around natural.
Yeah.
Like, and because those are all classified by the FDA as natural, but there's plenty of people who, are French or like French food and they eat bone marrow. But I think a lot of people would agree, like actually having it in drinks. And so one of the things that I've sort of, it's sort of another kind of passion project that I have, that I work on some stuff in Washington and, kind of like get on these bandwagons where I call out, the FDA and sometimes the EPA on some of this stuff that they're doing too, all in the name of, consumers should just know about this stuff. But the fact that there's so many of these drinks that aren't vegan, and I'm, not vegan, but I have friends who are, and I know there's people out there, and, some people even for religious reasons, right, are drinking these things and don't even like think for a minute, that they should actually be looking at what they're putting in their body. And I just think it's just not cool. Right. Like, it's just, right. Like, it's just not,
It's misleading. Yeah. Now I'm
it's misleading.
critical of anything that says healthy on it, because I look at some of our, health foods at the health food store, and it's some of the most processed junk I've ever seen. It just
Yeah.
doesn't happen to have whatever gluten or corn syrup or whatnot. And so, okay, well now I'm going to have to,
Yeah, it's just very hypocritical. And again, like, I just don't, I think part of the problem is, and, LaCroix has gotten some heat. I mean,
I saw, yeah.
over the years, but I can't really say what they put in. I just know that we use plants, it's not necessarily, depending on the flavor and depending on the time of the year, like our blackberry, for example, we may be using grape skins with it, but we're 100% vegan. We're not using, non-plants for our product. And so, but I think it's a very valid concern, that's out there. And I think not just in our beverages, but also in our food industry, and also, even like vitamins. I mean, it's crazy. Like, vitamins aren't regulated. I mean, like, it's crazy. People are obviously buying a vitamin, at Target, because they believe that they want to fix something or they want to get healthier or whatever. They're like on the program. And it's like, I actually, look at some of these retailers too. And I say, like, just don't buy it then. Don't put it on your shelf. Don't put it behind your brand, because you're tricking the consumer. And again, like, you can go ahead and like sell it. That's not what I'm trying to stop doing. What I'm saying is, like, just disclose. Like, that's all. If you tell people, like, oh, we're not regulated, we're just selling stuff and trying to trick you, then, and people still buy it, cool. That's fine.
And your tagline for your company, helping people fall in love with healthy choices. I love that, because we want everybody to be responsible. Like me, if I'm going to be drinking this stuff, I should go figure out what is in it. What is in this brand, this company, but we don't do that because it's on the shelves and we believe it since the FDA approved it. And well, this is part of your story, and I want to go, and I want to go back. I mean, now I appreciate even where you started off with your childhood. Your youngest of 5 kids. I've got 9 kiddos, and so I appreciate.
What?
Yeah,
Oh my gosh.
but I appreciate you saying you had to fend for yourself and ultimately, make your voice heard. So I'm thinking about some of my kids and think, hey, I don't know what they would have been naturally if they'd have been only children. They came into a family and they have to do that. But I assume as I look at your trajectory that even that, your early childhood and that reality was a lot of what made you, I'm sure you get the, the aspect of, okay, is, a very driven, but you were, I mean, it was a big part of your entire path. It seems to have started back then from being the youngest of five to, gymnastics. You said you were a feisty kid, and that your family seems to have been, even to the later parts of you testifying about your father, big influence on making you who you were and why you pushed forward as much as you did.
Yeah. And it wasn't clear to me, obviously, back then. I mean, I think I've gotten this, question over the years. I mean, I think it's like, for me, I think that the quick thing when I was writing this book, when I was thinking about it, is we almost had two sets of, like, two families, because I have a brother and sister that are 15 and 16 years older than me. And then there was a huge break. And then my parents had three more kids. And so the three kids were super, super tight. And then I had these, brothers and a sister that were older. And one of the stories in there is about my brother. Like I used to sit there and, he would always be tinkering and doing things and fixing up cars. And I'd sit in the garage with him because he had great music and stuff. And I'd just sit there and talk to him and like hang out and ask him what he was doing. Or, for therapy, I think sometimes he would just like talk to me about how hard it was, to do this kind of stuff. And so I was a sponge, just constantly, learning about, what he was doing, but also he, wanted to make money. I mean, we were very super middle class, like, it was like, he knew he had to have a job and do stuff. But I think, like, having that instilled in me, like, early on, I never really understood why I couldn't, like, be him, right? Like, why I couldn't go and get a job, just because of age. Like, and people would say to me, like my dad would say, well, it's just because, and I'd be like, well, why? Like I'd always be asking why. And so I've said to parents out there, I'm like, if your kid is always asking why, like, it's okay, right? Like, let them keep asking why. It's just, you're just curious, right?
Well, and you saying that you're a sponge, I mean, that's the thing. We look at kids and go, why are they that way? And we don't know what is it that germinated that. But yeah, it's interesting. You talked about your older brother, Kevin, which I picked up since that's my name. It stuck out, but that you were aware of him and his drive and his overcoming obstacles, and jointly aware of your parents having dreams they didn't go after. And you wrote about that in the book. How old were you then when you realized that? Because that's a big thing for a kid to be cognizant of.
Yeah. I mean, pretty young. I think I was probably like, 8 or 9 years old. My mom actually went back to work when I was in kindergarten. Yeah. And so she had been home, like, raising the kids and sort of like doing substitute teaching. She was an art history major. And then she decided when I was into kindergarten and was going to school more, that she would go and kind of find her passion around fashion. And so she was actually, working initially in a department store, and she ultimately wanted to do stuff around, like, personal shopping. I mean, this was way before people were even talking about this. And so, I talk about this in the chapter in the book, but, my dad definitely, and my brothers and sisters had definitely an impact on me, but also, my mom changing careers at age like 45, was just kind of like, it was normal, right? Like, it was just kind of, and also my dad just being, I mean, of course he liked the money, that she was, like, making and whatever, but he was also kind of like, well, that's cool. Like, he was just, I mean, so he was supportive, right? Yeah. And he just wanted her to be happy. I mean, happy wife, happy life, right? Like, he was like, he was just like, and so it would be a conversation, just like around the house, just kind of like, that's awesome that you're doing something that you really love. Like that, there was a constant kind of overlying, conversation, which, again, like, I didn't know that was abnormal, right? Like, I think in so many houses, it's kind of like, you know, it's just not, people don't switch careers and, you know, and they
What,
certainly didn't do it
and,
then.
and I don't know that they talk about it either. One of the benefits in my childhood was that my parents discussed their work, their pursuits, their challenges in front of me. And I
Yeah.
got to be
And
a part
same.
of that. I'm so grateful for it, because I also think we have kids, and that's just, you talk with the kids about kid stuff in their school, but you don't, the adults talk over here. And I think we're gypping our kids when we don't let them be a
Yeah.
part of the ride. And you shared that in there. And so to realize that your dad is in this, good job, the golden handcuffs, but he's not pursuing what he cares about, because I saw the thread of that as you talk about the book and your journey, that here you are and you're the anomaly of a college graduate where they're all looking at, hey, where can I get a good job? And you're going out applying to a lot. I saw that 90 interviews that you got, but you're ultimately looking for what is the thing that you, my words, resonate with, that you're interested in.
Yeah.
And that thread came in, because that's what I teach my kids. Whatever you're going to do, there's a lot of
Yeah.
things out there. Why on earth would you not find something that you at least have interest in? But as you know, that is not the norm. It's not where our culture is right now at all.
Yeah, no, I think it's so true. You know, and I think I was to some extent an anomaly, especially for being a Gen Xer, you know, too. I think it's just not, I don't know, like I was searching for this, like, what do I want to do every single day? And I knew one thing, which was I wanted to leave Arizona, because I had just never really traveled much other than California. I had just sort of like been there. And I thought, I had met all these people when I was in college that had been from all these other places. And I just thought, there's a whole world out there and I want to go find it. And, you know, and that's when I just decided I'm going to go to New York and I'm going to go and figure it out. But,
Was there a catalyst for that though? A catalyst even for the interest in travel? I mean, I find when we talk about there, so there's a motive. You had a reason to go.
yeah.
You wanted to go travel, but was there an exposure that made you think, gosh, I shouldn't be so secluded, or I am so secluded, I haven't done that? Something that you were, just exposed to that it was a
I think,
catalyst for
you
that?
know, I think college for me was kind of the thing that was where I would just meet people from all over the country. And
Yeah.
I would hear about, you know, I would think that they were like a little, if like I'd grown up in Arizona and I'd meet people from Chicago. And it wasn't just their accent that made them a little bit different. Maybe they liked pizza more than I did. And I like knew Mexican food, you know, like it was just weird things like that, that I would just be like, huh, like, wow, there's like actually a little Italy, you know, and in these cities, like I would just be fascinated by,
Yeah.
and I'm still fascinated by it. Like I would just like think about, you know, consumers and people and sort of how are they different. And so that for me, I think was, you know, when I decided to embark on this journey of like really going to find, you know, what I ultimately wanted to do, I was pretty open. I knew I wanted to live in a big city, right? Like, and I didn't know if I'd get a job in a big city, but I knew that that's what I wanted to do. But, you know, it was also, I didn't know if I could afford to do what I did. And so I also felt like that was a little bit of a gift when I ended up getting, you know, a plane ticket that was like $400 to go to all of these
Yeah.
locations. And, you know, I always tell people, like, especially college grads, like I learned a lot about myself during that time. And I also figured, you know, I stayed with friends' parents, like along the way. And I always had enough money to like, you know, when I went into their house, like I, you know, bought some flowers, like I just did the unexpected, you know, just to, like, you know, just to make sure that they would, you know, just how do you treat people like the right way? And again, that those kind of things, I think just parlay even into business. Like, I
Well,
think,
totally. But I want to know again where that came from. Where
I
does
don't know.
because
Yeah.
I'm looking at PR, and you talked about your first job, and you were into asking questions and seeking out what the customer needed in it was a toy
Yeah.
store, I think you
Yeah.
said. But even that, because I look back and I go, I don't know if I wasn't taught it, I was at least exposed to that. My parents were business owners always. And I saw customer service, and I'm sure they taught me some, but it was just the exposure of seeing that and seeing you over deliver and those things and those messages that got implanted. But I mean, again, you had parents, or your dad at least, who was in a job where you probably didn't see that, though you do cite your brother and his drive and
Yeah,
tinkering
kind of
and
entrepreneurial,
entrepreneurial overcoming
drive.
obstacles, which here you got a book all these years later about overcoming obstacles. And you cite that, and again, at an early age of being aware of seeing him, again, exposure. Seems like you had some pretty divine exposures.
Yeah. No, and I do think obviously, they had an impact on sort of who I was, but I think that, you know, you can't discount the fact that I didn't have like a lot of people in front of me saying like, you can't get a job at a toy store at age 14. My dad was like, I mean, he thought it was kind of like funny. Like he was just like, wait, what? You've got a job at age 14. You're like going to be working Sundays, like in the toy store doing the cash register. And then like the next week, I'm like, yeah, no, she's taking me this toy fair. I'm actually doing the buying. He's like, wait, what? Like, what? I mean, this is crazy. And he just he was like, good for you, like, that's great. And by the way, you're making whatever, $8 an hour or whatever, they were paying me. I don't know. Like, but the trade-off too is, and something I teach my own kids and teach, people who have come to Hint and work for me. Like, I wasn't afraid to like show up and work hard and always take on things. Like, I mean, obviously I was 14, so she knew I hadn't bought toys before, but it just like, I just wasn't daunted by the idea where somebody had faith in me to actually go and do this. And I was like, okay, put me in the game, like I'm good. And so I think like that kind of spirit has always, been in me. And I thought somewhere in the back of my head, I thought, if it doesn't really work out, it'd be kind of funny. Like it went kind of a little ways, and then here's where it went wrong. Yeah. And some of that was like, some of these stories along the way that, I mean, people will call it risk. Like, was it risky that you were 14 and you were, buying toys for the toy store? Like, what if like the whole toy store went under because you bought the wrong toys? I'm like, yeah, it could have happened, right? It didn't. But it totally right. And it could have happened. And so the adults around me were like watching this whole thing kind of in like, gosh, that's a lot. Like, I mean, she's got a lot of faith in Kara, but they weren't also like, giving me a trophy for it. You know what I mean? They were kind of like sitting there in awe, and then they would share with their friends or, like, can you believe this? Like, this is what she's doing over here. And, and it was just kind of shocking, I think, in some ways.
Well, and we've got, when I look at today's culture, I admittedly struggle with kids who don't seem to want a lot. Of course, screens have factored into there so much, where it's too easy to fill your time and not be bored enough to look around. But it's still interesting, even back then, just to wonder, what was the thing? Was it just a curiosity? Were you wanting money for something? Was it something that made you feel good about yourself? Again, when you look at that, what were the things that drove you at that age?
So I think having siblings who were making money, right? And like they had money to go to the mall. I liked that idea too. And then also I think the curiosity side of this, like once I got the bug, but I never usually had it all figured out how it was going to go down. Like my girlfriend, reminded me on Facebook a couple of months ago about her best story about me, from grade school, which was when we were 11 or 12 years old. I reached out to her and I said, okay, it's the middle of summer in Arizona. It's like 120 degrees. And I said, Robin, let's start a camp. And she was like, wait, what? Like, we're 12 years old. And I said, yeah, it'll be great. Let's start a camp. And she was like, how much is like the camp? Like, how are we going to get like the kids? And I was like, oh, don't worry about it. We'll like create a sign and we'll go hold it on the corner. And then people will ask us how much, and then we'll figure out, like, based on, what their response is, we'll make a different sign. Like, let's start it with like $4. And we started
test marketing. Right.
Yeah. And so then all of a sudden we figured out that like $5 was like the magic number. and for whatever reason. So then we, started this camp, and she was like, well, what are we going to do? And I said, so we can go to the grocery store and we can get these large boxes that like paper towels come in, and toilet paper comes in, and we can build a city. And so this is an opportunity for your kids to like build a city. Well, maybe it'll be a town. Like it won't really be a city because that'll take too long. So we'll just do a town. And so we had these connections like all over the lawn. And like, so again, like my parents would come home and they'd be like, what are you doing? There's all these little kids in the neighborhood. And then after like 3 weeks, I said, oh, I'm bored. Like I just wanted to go do something else at this point. It was totally successful. And I had like learned enough. I knew that I could like run this business, and Robin and I split the money, and it was like done. But she said, I knew you never really had it figured out along the way, but you were okay with not having all the answers. And so, I think that's one of the earlier stories, even before the toy store, where, there were definitely signs that I was interested and okay with ambiguity, right? Like,
well,
it's like,
and I'm going to guess though that from your family, your parents, that there was an aspect of you're okay. I'm going to guess that they weren't the straight A's or you're in the doghouse. I mean, there was some flexibility or some approval regardless. Maybe that's it, kind of the unconditional love thing. Because you obviously were, and it sounds like, at least as far as how you relate to your brother or talk about him too, that it was okay to try things. It was okay if they didn't work out, because you talking about that, not having it all figured out. I don't have the quote, but it's in the latter part of your book where you talked about, it was my paraphrasing would be, you knew you could provide the minimally viable product. As long as you had that, even if the water was a little cloudy or the labels were falling off, that was a story, that was okay. And that's something that you obviously had from a very early age.
Yeah. And no, exactly. And I think that is, that's the aspect of trying too, that I think also, also being owning things, right? Like I've been also, I think that is another theme that, my parents cared more about us lying than they than actually owning, and believe me, like I had 2 brothers who were incredibly naughty, and, and they learned that early on, that is like, they would make some wrong mistakes, along the way. But the fact that they actually owned that they did what they weren't supposed to be doing was much more important to my parents. And so things, again, like lessons like that. But my parents, they cared about grades. All of us, all 5 of us, like never really had issues with grades. I mean, I don't know, for whatever reason, but they also, the one thing that, my dad really did care about was sports. And so we always had to be like in a sport, always. And so it was like, and so, there were times like when I played softball, because that was the only sport that I could be playing. And I knew that I wasn't the best softball player, but I was like, oh, I'm playing softball. Like, here's how you play. Here are the best people, but whatever. And I would, be able to sort of articulate that. Like, I think like the things that I learned from individual sports versus teamwork, like I was just so curious about like what made great people, like how you depend on people. Even today, like how I build my team today, I always say to managers, like always hire people that do not only stuff better than you for your team, but also that are going to educate you. Because if they're going to educate you, you'll always be mentally with them, right? If you're sitting here and always the best person on the team, or, like you just burn out, like you just get bored. If you're the one that's always like, educating people. And frankly, I mean, I talk about this at AOL, that I felt like I got myself into a position where that was me, that I was constant. People were coming to me, okay, now what do I do? Now what do I do? Now what do I do? And it just became, it was fine. Right. And that's where I talk about, management too, that I think for me, it's, you know, I always want to surround myself with, you know, things that I don't know, right? And people that I don't really understand. And so that's why it's been, for me, jumping into the beverage industry, the first 2 years were like, you know, I was getting my MBA in beverages, and it was like super exciting. And none of my friends that I hung out with, they were all in tech in Silicon Valley, you know, and they're like, wait, what are you doing? And I'm like, I know, it's really crazy, but it's like fascinating. Like not only the soda industry, but also how you make this stuff.
Well,
And
to me, it took some, when I looked at that, and again, you've got this great corporate pedigree at that time. And then to do it took some humility, is what
totally.
I thought. And, you know, I do want to hit on what you just said though, about, and my paraphrasing was being the smartest person in the room. There's some quote that I've heard to the degree of, if you're the smartest person in the room, you need a different room. You need a better room.
Totally.
But I see it as such I think I've got a little bit of a chip on my shoulder, because in the world of leadership, it's, if you are a leader, if you are a coach, if you are a consultant, it is so easy to fall into that trap of, you have to be the smartest person in the room on every topic. And it's not believable anymore, for one thing. And I think people have soured against that in the world of, you know, experts and authors and leaders, that the ones that used to be, if you're on the stage, you have to come off like you've got it all figured out and you've arrived. And I don't think people believe it anymore.
Yeah.
I think they've lost
No, I think that's
shiny.
true. And I mean, I would just add that I don't think, for me, I didn't necessarily think I was always the smartest person in the room, but I was put into a position
Oh,
to,
that's what I mean. Totally. You're
yeah,
expected to be in a
you're
lot of degrees.
expected to be. And
Yeah.
I think, I think there's a lot, I don't think we actually, you know, this is probably a whole other topic, but I think schools, you know, when I learned about management, when I went to school and I was a, you know, journalism major and was a minor in finance, I never learned that, you know, managers should actually like hire people that are better than them. Right? Like, you know, your role as a manager, and this is what I instill in our team, your role as a manager is actually, you know, to kind of be a parent in some ways, right? Where you've got, you know, the title, you've got the responsibility to do this and make sure that the wheels are turning, right? That doesn't mean that you hire people that are just like, that's all they do every single day. And so I always share with people, you know, my you know, curiosity when they're hiring people. I'm like, so what do they know that you don't?
Yeah.
And I'm like, because I care about you as an employee, like I care about them, but they're not here yet. And I care about you as an employee because I want to make sure that every single day you're engaged.
Yeah.
Because I know that, like, I believe that the biggest part of burnout comes from, you know, when people are just doing the same thing every single day. And then, you know, I mean, and frankly, it's true for parenting too, right? Like if you're sitting there always giving directions, always doing the same thing every day, it just gets monotonous and you get frustrated, right?
It is. That's so funny you say that, because we've gone from, you know, homeschooling to charter schools to part-time school to private school to full-time public school and back again, because I think we just get so bored with the monotony of the grind.
Yeah. And I think like that's just a really, I think that sort of aspect, I think just parlays into, you know, like how I think about, people say like, I've been interviewed for, how do you think about management? Why do you think that? Because it's not sort of like a topic that people even talk about. Or like I was speaking to a group of engineers at UC Berkeley, and I think I really ticked off the head of engineering there because I said, like, if you really want to be Mark Zuckerberg or pick your, you know, Silicon Valley guy, like go and actually appreciate finance and appreciate marketing and go take some classes while you're here in those areas. Because if you don't actually understand, if you aren't a generalist, you're not going to be running a company. Yeah. You can be a killer engineer and make plenty of dough, you know, but at the end of the day, like you've got to actually have respect. It doesn't mean you have to do it every day, but you have to have respect and you have to, you know, understand enough about those businesses. And unfortunately, and, you know, great schools like Berkeley, for example, they don't have people, you know, they don't have their students yet. And that's what I mean about sort of education. They don't have them engineers are taking engineering classes, and
Right.
that's what they do every single day. And that's not teaching them for the real world.
Well, you pull me back to humility again, that I see that in your story so often, even that from a management perspective, to hire people better than you, take some. It reminds me, there's a story of a head coach, NFL, college, I don't know, but he was known by creating the most other head coaches. He had them come through his system. They said, gosh, doesn't that bother you? He said, well, what's my other option? To get lesser coaches that are going to stick with me and not get the best, that want to go on and become a head coach. Is that I get the best all along. It's a story. It's a big name coach. I can't remember what it is, but that I haven't heard that perspective in a while. And that, well, obviously that's what's helped make your company what it is. I want to come back to you on some of the motives, because you had your third kid and 9/11 happened. And at that point you said that you made a commitment to making a positive difference in the world. Was that was there any hindsight thought of, gosh, haven't done anything worthwhile, but I'm just, doing jobs? And did you question what you had been doing as far as its contribution to the world? Or did you just simply look at that incident of 9/11 and go, holy smokes, I just feel a greater commitment because of that?
Yeah. I mean, I think for me too, that, you read in the book, I moved to New York City, and I think in many ways it was just like the most diverse place I had ever been in my life, right? Like I had just met a lot of really interesting people from all different parts of the world, and that were living there, and definitely almost interviewed for jobs in the World Trade Center. I had friends who were there, and a friend who I later found out was actually coming back from maternity leave, coming, on the PATH train like that morning, and she was just late, and obviously didn't get there, thank God. But it was like almost too close for comfort, where I just thought, if there's no tomorrow, and it stopped right now, would I be okay with my life? And I think like that is when I just I had these young kids. I, had a husband I loved, I like had a great house, in San Francisco. Like I don't know. I just looked around, and it was really, there wasn't anything that anybody could say to me that kind of would have changed my mind. Right. Because it had been my journey, and sort of growing, and kind of what I was hearing, along the way. And I had never in my life kind of had something, that really stopped me in my tracks that was that memorable. I mean, I've shared with, my teenage kids now that I said, like, 2020 for you guys, it will impact you. Like right now you're like kind of looking around, but you'll see like there's behaviors that people have that are, not necessarily what you subscribe to. Like there's, like we had a bunch of people on our team that got sick, they didn't pass away, but they had relatives that did. So there was just a lot of people that have been impacted. And so for me, I think 9/11 was that, and different, but had sort of that same impact. And so that's when I, really started to think about nonprofits. And unfortunately, I sort of somewhat jokingly talk about this, like AOL kind of ruined me in a way, because we're working in a startup that had, like the hockey stick that we went through at AOL was just like, you're on this like high of like growing a company. I mean, one day there was 200 people in the company. The next day there was 5,000. I mean, literally, and it just kept, then the next week it was like 15,000. And like all of a sudden there's just people like, in the company, and you don't know most of these people, and you're all there kind of working, and you're in it. But I feel like, I don't know, like I had a great time there, but I just thought I'm not sure that I would just be like satisfied that.
That's what I was going to ask. So it almost took the wind out of your sails. Is that fair to say, for this corporate trajectory that you were on?
Well, I just didn't really, when I would hear about, people who had some kind of purpose, whether it was, first responders or 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 something that was, you know, really going towards like a goal, like a nonprofit. And the nonprofit seemed like much more doable for me at this point, because I had, you know, these young kids, and I thought, oh, okay, well, maybe I could go do that. But the problem with the nonprofits that I was talking to was they just didn't move fast enough. And again, like I always talk about, you know, your journey,
It's not
right?
not an entrepreneurial hotbed there.
No,
Yeah.
and I was just like, okay, like we've been here for 2 hours, like what are we doing? And at AOL, I think the thing is like every one of the meetings, like we would only show up at meetings. We wouldn't like have meetings just for the sake of meetings. We would show up at meetings because we had to make decisions.
Mm-hmm.
And there would be a decision made, right? And we would just like move, and it might not be the right decision, but it was like things like that. Then I was coming into a nonprofit and I'd be like, wait, we have a meeting like every Tuesday, you know, and like, what are we doing? And so I didn't take a job with any of the nonprofits. I was more volunteering initially to kind of get a feel for it. And I felt like, while I could have impact potentially, I'd have to like change a culture almost. And so that was my really kind of my first, you know, breath in that. And I think another thing that a few people have picked up on the book that, you know, I talk about, you know, these different environments that I was in. For me too, it was like, you know, when I ultimately created my own environment by starting my company, I had been in all these different cultures.
Yeah.
And so I brought, like I cherry picked from all of them, right? To sort of say like, this is the perfect thing where, you know, still to this day, like I always share with people when they come on, like I don't prescribe to having like weekly meetings. I said like, and I don't expect people to actually have to show up at meetings. Like your responsibility, if you're having a meeting, you need to sort of like say why you're having a meeting,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because otherwise I'd rather see people like go take a bike ride at 4 o'clock in the afternoon and just like have a good time and still be smiling, right?
Yeah.
And not, and I think like that kind of like culture and mentality is something that I got from having different, you know, playing in different like games along the
Yeah.
way, that I'm thankful for, because I was able to, you know, kind of build something that I think ultimately makes sense, at least to me.
Well, yeah. Speaking of cherry picking, which you just talked about, I think I like cherry better than blackberry. And I'm
Yeah.
generally a blackberry guy. The cherry is just awesome.
I love cherry too. I'm constantly, cherry is amazing. And you know, the product. And so anyway, I've been drinking a ton of that one.
Yeah. So you go from this incident, 9/11, and then you come up to the point where you have 3 kids, you're exhausted, you're dealing with skin issues, you're up 50 pounds, and the docs prescribe some meds to reset your hormones. And you're thinking, that's not right. What was the timeline between that? Because here you've got this inciting incident of 9/11. Now you have another one of your own health issues. What was the gap in there time-wise?
Yeah, it was like a couple of years that
Okay.
I was like sort of playing around with it.
Yeah.
And I just had my third child.
Yeah.
So I was pregnant when 9/11 hit. And I think for me, it was like, I don't know, I think it's a very common thing when people are in between, you know, roles, that they're saying, okay, I'm going to take the time to like, you know, get healthy. And
Yeah.
this new store, Whole Foods, had just opened up in the Bay Area too. So I thought, it's like so pretty, and you know, it's got all this like great food. I thought if I just go shop there, then maybe I would get healthy. And I somewhat joke about it, as much as I love Whole Foods, like there's a lot of unhealthy stuff in Whole Foods. You can still get in trouble in Whole
Yeah. You
Foods.
can still get
Right?
you can still get diabetes in Whole
Yeah.
Foods. Yeah.
Yeah, it's still, and so what I just, you know, and I finally had time to sort of like, you know, actually shop like I used to before. I mean, I was, you know, trying to be a parent and run around and travel to the East Coast every week. Like I was out of time. I mean, now I'm like leisurely like going through the aisles at Whole Foods
Mm-hmm.
and like, you know, really seeing, and this was even before I came up with the concept, but seeing how, you know, consumers like me were just so fooled by, you know, like packaging and, you know, things that just because they were a little more expensive, like I had sort of bought into this whole idea that, you know, well, if it's at like a fancy market, then it will be better for you and it will, you know, taste better. Anyway, so
Value proposition there. Sure.
right. Like
Yeah.
I was like, you know, I was this incredible consumer.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think there was some, you know, there was some slow like timing that was going on just as I was kind of living my life. And
Well, I appreciate that. That's why I pulled
yeah,
it out, because here
yeah,
you are, and you know you're flying high, flying fast, whatever. This incident happens, and it would be real easy to think that, oh man, you made the shift immediately. You know, you quit the job, you started whatever, going after it, and 2 years still pass while this is incubating, if we could
yeah,
say, and then you have this incident, and folks, you'll read this in the book. So you were leading up to that. You said you had a Diet Coke addiction of 9-10 cans a day, which is a lot, holy smokes, and stopped that, went to 8 glasses of water per day, and within a short time, what was it, 20 pounds, your skin cleans up.
yeah, 24 pounds in 2.5 weeks. And I was kind of, and that's when I really just had this aha moment. And, you know, that was, you know, I would say that it was definitely weight. I had probably given up on being able to lose the weight because I had tried so often. But for me, like the skin issues were just kind of like, I never had, you know, even teenage acne. And so for me, it was just kind of like, why is this going on? And so after going to my dermatologist and, you know, really trying to get it under control, I just thought like, wow, I wonder if it is something that I'm eating. Nowhere did I like have a conversation with a doctor saying like, well, what are you drinking? Nobody questioned the diet soda at all. And I didn't question the diet soda at all either. And, you know, and then I started again, like, you know, I had time. I was like shopping. I was looking at labels on my food and everything. And then all of a sudden I saw that there were a lot of ingredients in the soda can, you know, that I had like probably loved more than my husband, right? Like, you know, it was like I like had to have it every single day. Like I was just like, why not? And I think that's when I really, you know, realized, and you know, I was talking about it as like an addiction. And you know, now I'm so used to like talking about that. Even when I was first, you know, started Hint and I was talking about my diet soda, you know, relationship and how it was like this huge addiction and how I gave it up. Like it's funny because no one ever called me out on, you know, I didn't sort of highlight to people that I was drinking 8 to 12 cans a day.
Well,
Right.
it's
But I would,
diet. It's diet. It was
it's
healthy, right?
diet. Yeah. But then after, of course, I started Hint and, you know, I've met people over the years who worked with me at all of my different jobs that I had. Maybe not the toy store, but the CNN and Time and AOL, they were all like, yeah, we would never go into a meeting with you unless you had the Diet Coke. And I was like, really? Like, was I that like bad? And they just said, no, you like had, you know, you had to have it. And again, like, that's just, it's so, you know, it's just so sad, right? Like it's sad that you've got something that this like connection. And I just think it's just, it's not something, I mean, why should the soda industry ultimately fix it? And why should, you know, the pharmaceutical companies and, you know, back a lot of the diet sweetened companies when, you know, when I started this company, a friend of mine works at the Center for Disease Control. And she had mentioned to me that, she was working on this study on type 2 diabetes and how it was like 2% of the population 15 years ago. And now it's like 45% of the population.
We've just eclipsed 50. We're now over
Yeah.
50%. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's crazy when you think about like most of those people are actually claiming to drink low fat and diet. Now, given what we know about that, don't you think we would actually say, maybe this isn't actually working towards getting people healthier? But again, like there's no incentive because the pharmaceutical companies are making so much money off of people being sick. Yeah. And so that was like the conversation that I was having with myself, you know, kind of like, you know, maybe kind of angry a little, like that I had been fooled and that I was like potentially heading down this path and nobody really cared. Right. And I thought, it's like kind of sad, right? But again, all my friends were in tech, right? Like they were all, like, it wasn't like I thought that they were all evil or anything like that. I just thought that they just wouldn't understand what I was like kind of thinking about every single day and reading about. And, and so that was really like where my mind was in the process.
So I love that you said the relationship that you had with Diet Coke, because I think we have a relationship with everything, and especially those addictive things that, yes, seem innocuous, but then you find out it's taking down your life. So, I mean, obviously, the book and the story, you go and you start making water, you come up with this thing, people want it, and they're asking you, where did you get that? You say, gosh, I made it. And so you build this up until the point where you come to your husband and say, I want to build a business out of this. And the quote that I love from him is realizing, as he's over here in healthcare, as I think so often, in healthcare, I live in that health and wellness world, and there's such great things coming out. There's such great knowledge. And it seems like daily there's another book, there's another message, there's another treatment, there's something else. And it's awesome. And I look at it and go, it's great. It's not going to make a dent. It's just not. It's not going to affect the culture. You talked about incentive, and that's a big part of my life right now, is how do we incentivize healthy decisions? You talk about making them fall in love. How do we incentivize? And that your husband came back and he says, man, here I am working over here in the health industry. I think we can change more people's lives through getting them to change to water over sugary drinks than anything I'm doing. I would put that above just about anything that I've heard as far as how many people, I mean, and literally, Kara, I mean, and you know this, but it's just, I want people to hear it. What is the tick moving the needle, as we would say, that you have made, and how many lives by getting that? If you can get people to take 5% less sugar in their dietary intake, and probably people who switch over to your water do a lot better than that because they're consuming sugary drinks, which are some of the worst culprits. What is the tick that how many people have you kept out of the hospital? Have you kept off insulin? I mean, you don't know, but it's got to be significant. I'm going to put it above any of the next pharmaceutical that came out, or even the next nutritional supplement that came out, or the next book on diabetes or whatever, hormones or autoimmune or whatever. This is one of the best drugs ever, right? Yeah,
no, totally. And I think, the other aspect, I mean, he was doing a medical startup that was really trying to get better information out of consumers to help them get better diagnostics. He grew up his dad's a doctor, and a great doctor, and, was always frustrated he's a gastro doctor, but it was always frustrated by, he would tell people like, you need to do this and things will get better. And, he couldn't go home with them and make sure that they did those things. Yeah. Right. And then also, the fact that it would, like, he never even knew whether or not they took him seriously. Right. Like, he would be telling somebody like, you've had colon cancer and you can't actually, do this anymore. And then, they'd be back with colon cancer and they'd lie and say, oh, they didn't do it, whatever. And I would hear these stories kind of secondhand and think, again, it's like part of my journey. And I thought, like, maybe it's too complicated for people to actually, like, maybe actually if you get them sooner and you get them enjoying a product that actually tastes good, but also like makes them realize, like, for $2 or less a bottle and changing one tiny little thing every single day, like, you'll not only prevent, to your point, millions of people from ultimately getting some of these diseases, hard to measure, but yes, like that's, part of it. But then also it's not, you're getting them before they ultimately are in defense mode, I guess is that, and I think like that is what, I saw and my husband saw, like, kind of, I mean, it's sort of, I always talk about, no one can take away what's happened to you in the past and your journey and all of these pieces. Like, here I grew up in Arizona and I was like, an entrepreneur, but also super, engaged with my diet soda. He didn't drink diet soda. he was like sitting there, the son of a doctor, and hearing these stories at home. And then all of a sudden, and he really appreciated the fact that his father was always trying to help people gain health. Right. And so all of a sudden this idea comes up right in front of him. And he was just like, that's it. Right. Like you're actually, like you may actually, because you're not prescribing to people, you're actually like sharing something that tastes good with them. And if you can get them interested because it just tastes good, then, they'll start to see the changes and know that they can do it. Yeah. And so I've always shared actually with entrepreneurs that, I can name 100 products that were developed by doctors that never made it. Yeah. And people think like, oh, it's like made by a doctor, actually people kind of get afraid of doctors. They don't really want to like buy a product or walk around with something that is made by a doctor, at least not in a beverage, right? Yeah. Like it's like, and so I think like that's another piece of this too, that it's like, it was hard to articulate, what we were seeing or what we were feeling, but we felt like it was worth trying.
Well, and ultimately it kind of comes down that road of social entrepreneurship, that you've got a for-profit business and you were before looking at nonprofit, and you look at humanitarian altruistic endeavors. And I would say that of the products I've run across, I don't know one that's probably made as big of an impact as this. And again, I'm a huge advocate of, let's say, nutritional supplements. Yeah. As one. I'm a believer in those, that we can't get all that we need from the American diet, even at the best that we would try to, that there's deficits. And so I'm a fan of those. It's very difficult to measure the results of those. I think more so though, if I can see a family, see a person, and just look at their average grams of sugar per day that are probably going to involve some kind of a beverage, and just pull that off. Okay, we would be guesstimating some, but my goodness, you could do a clinical trial with that and say, if you take somebody with this many grams of sugar and pull it down here, we can know what it does to their bodies. It's huge. And yet here you have a business that's fun. It's, as you said, it's not a bad tasting nutritional supplement. It tastes great. And it is changing lives for the better. Now you have a brand, as you talk about then, that people want to associate with, which is, is a holy grail. That's gigantic.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And people feel like, I think even 15 years later, the number of people who write to me daily and say like, they use words like, they discovered my product. You helped me. Right? Like those are very, very positive, words, right? Like it's, I don't have a PhD in vocabulary, but I know enough to know like when you use a word discover, it's like a very positive feeling, right? Yeah. You don't discover something negative. You discover something that is, typically that is, really bringing you something
beneficial.
Right?
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
And so I think it's, and again, sometimes people, we hear from a number of cancer patients who have our product when they're like going through chemo, and, and they think like they're the first one to ever share with me that hint helps mask the metallic taste that they get when they're told by their doctor to drink more water. And then they hear about hint helps mask the metallic taste. And then they start drinking it, and then they write to me and say, thank you for helping me get through chemo. I discovered, and it's like, and again, that can also be, I work at Google, and, I started working here and everybody was drinking this product. So I picked up a bottle, and you helped me drink more water, right? Like I discovered it while I'm working here. Like, and it's just these very, like, again, it's different scale of like, is it really trying to help them get healthier, or is it just drinking more water? And I think for me as a, not only as a founder, but also as a CEO, it's like incredibly impactful, right? Like it's just to wake up and know that, people are depending on you. We're also, super careful at, not unlike, some of the supplement and vitamin companies that are out there. They do their thing, but we're very much about, don't actually, we don't make any health claims other than the fact, like we just help people drink water. And we're very careful about that. And, you know, and people will say like, oh, it, you know, it definitely like whatever, you know, help my cholesterol or whatever. We're like, that's awesome. Right. You know, and I think that that's just another, there are so many companies out there that make claims and often get sued,
Oh
right,
yeah.
for making a lot of those claims. But I think for me, I never wanted to have a company that, you know, was sort of in that business of trying to, you know, like potentially trick people, right?
Yeah.
And not all of them do, probably, but I just don't have the data to back up.
It's pervasive.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think it's just an important point. It's like, if you've got a product that can stand on its own, that like, why do you need that? Why do you need to, you know, sort of have.
Well, your tagline, you know, not making a medical claim, but it's brilliant. Drink water, not sugar. Right there,
Mhm.
just kind of makes you feel convicted. Like, oh, son of a
Mhm.
gun, what am I drinking?
Yeah.
That's brilliant. Well, you know, just in your trajectory of motive. So here is this company that I would put on an altruistic humanitarian, you know, level of what it is doing out there. So you've got that. And then next, I mean, you obviously put a lot of focus, and you talk about that in the book, on the corporate culture that you get to spearhead, that you get to foster and nurture. And now you've kind of come, not, I wouldn't say full circle, I'm sure there's more of the circle to come, but now a book that you, what was the catalyst for that, of saying, gosh, I want to take this message further? Well, I guess you started speaking, you got called on to speak, and that became a big part of your life. And then if you didn't have the idea for a book, I'm sure you got approached to say, this could be a great offering to people too. But now you're going to go out and reach the masses with more of the heart of what you want to do. Where is that? Yeah, where do you find your primary motive as you get up each day right now?
Yeah. I mean, I think for me, the key thing in writing a book was that I could just really impact, you know, and inspire more people. And so I was, you know, I've been an active speaker for the last few years on building my company Hint. But it would always shock me when I would hear, you know, people asking questions from the audience or writing to me afterwards and sort of identifying themselves as very different than me, that they didn't have doubts. And I mean, that I didn't have doubts, they had doubts, and they were just really different from me. And they, you know, had fears, and I've never had any failures. I've been really lucky. And I was like, wow, you know, they really don't have, you know, the picture. And in fact, I don't think they have the picture of most, you know, entrepreneurs or successful people, or, you know, pro athletes, or, you know, you name it, right? Where I think like the difference really between these people and, you know, those other people or me is that they go try, and they're not afraid to live undaunted. And they, you know, and I think that over the last few years, I've, you know, I've limited it to like 5 hours a week trying to talk to people about, you know, everything from, you know, mentoring or helping them, you know, figure out some kind of sticking point in their company, whatever. And I thought, if I could actually write a book and sort of share my own experiences, then maybe I can actually reach a lot more people too. I think what's fascinating, the book's gotten amazing reviews, thankfully. I had one review from a somebody who's in like the B2B industry, and it was interesting because they said the thing that she doesn't do in her first book that maybe she should do in her second book is to basically at the end of every chapter, right, here's how you do things, 1, 2, 3. And so the first thing that I thought about was like, if you ask any entrepreneur how they did it, there's like, and you know, definitely I identify in the chapters sort of what we're talking about, but there's a lot of components, right, to actually how they did things. And oftentimes they'll go down a river and then they'll figure out, I'm going the wrong direction. They have good EQ, and they'll come back the other way, and then they'll head in this direction or whatever. And you obviously see it in the stories too.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it's, I also believe that the people who want the prescription, right, to say, you know, this is how you do this, they might not be entrepreneurs, and that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
Right? that is actually fine. Like I'm a huge believer that we also need contributors, right? To entrepreneurs, because they can't do it all on their own. I mean, if I didn't have people, right, that were actually doing, great things in the company, that's like super critical.
Yeah.
But I think to actually be the vision and sort of like, whether it's, Sarah Blakely from Spanx or Jeff Zuckerberg from Facebook, like it doesn't matter what the industry is. You could not sit them down, any great entrepreneur, Steve Jobs, who, like any of these people, and they could say it was 1, 2, 3.
Yeah.
They would tell you lessons that they've learned very similar to what I lay out in this book. And, frankly, the book has now been picked up in some classes, including at Wharton, on and on sort of like thinking about this stuff, because they're more, it's really training people to think about concepts and stories. And I believe through stories, that's not only how you learn how to do things or put it into your own perspective, but also, I think they also build great brands.
Well, I think what you said, concepts, yeah, I could share that as I look back through my trajectory, but there's so much, some of the biggest things that I've done. I look back and the first answer to the question, how'd you do it? Is go, I don't know. I'm not quite sure. I can give you some of the concepts, but well, your story it's so fascinating. It's inspiring. Just read it. Like I said, I've got one, I'll probably have more than one kid, but I got one particular who I know will resonate with your story of just being willing to try it, of being humble, of giving it a shot, of believing that you can make this thing work. So I'm grateful that you took the time to put it out there with as much else as you have going on. And I'm a fan of you and your company's mission, helping people fall in love with healthy choices. I don't know if there's an endeavor that will make a bigger dent in what's happening out there in healthcare right now. So Kara, thank you. Thanks for what you're doing.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you for taking the time to share.
Yeah. And definitely, if you want to pick up a copy of the book, it's Undaunted, Overcoming Doubts and Doubters. You can get it at I think you're going to put a link on the site, but also
I'm going to give them
Amazon as well. And,
oh yeah.
And,
yep.
yeah, awesome.
Yep.